Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video, we'll be covering how close to failure training should be taken for the goal of muscle hypertrophy. First and foremost, let's define what we mean by proximity to failure. Proximity to failure refers to how close a set is taken to the point where the trainee can't perform any more reps with strict form. Proximity to failure is usually quantified using the rate of perceived exertion scale or the reps in reserve scale. These two scales are essentially the same thing, although they are in reverse of each other. The rate of perceived exertion scale, or RPE for short, is a subjective rating of how close a trainee thinks they are from failure. A rating of 10 means that no more reps were able to be performed. A rating of 9 means that one more rep could have been performed. A rating of 8 means that 2 more reps could have been performed, and so on. The reps in reserve scale, or RIR for short, works in exactly the same way, although the numbers are reversed. So an RIR of 0 means that no more reps could have been performed, an RIR of 1 means that one more rep could have been performed, and so on. Now that we understand what proximity to failure is, let's now explore how close to failure we need to train for optimal hypertrophy gains. To answer this question, we first need to understand the theory of how motor unit recruitment works. Motor units refer to nerves that attach to a muscle, and specifically to a group of muscle fibers that the particular nerve innervates. These nerves are attached to muscle fibers of different sizes and strengths. The smaller and weaker muscle fibers can be classified as low threshold muscle fibers, and the bigger, stronger fibers can be classified as high threshold muscle fibers. When lifting weights, not all muscle fibers are always recruited immediately. If the load is reasonably light, say in the 12+ rep range, only the low threshold motor units will be used initially because the bigger and stronger fibers are not required. However, once the smaller fibers start to fatigue, the high threshold motor units must also assist in lifting the weight, as the low threshold muscle fibers can no longer continue to lift the load alone. So as the set is taken closer and closer to failure, more and more muscle fibers are being recruited. When heavier loads are used, say in the 1 to 10 rep range, basically all motor units are recruited from the beginning of the set. This is because the load is heavier and the low threshold muscle fibers cannot lift the weight alone. So how is this relevant to hypertrophy training? Essentially, when training for muscle growth, we want to train all muscle fibers with each set. This is to ensure that we get hypertrophy of all muscle fibers rather than only the low threshold fibers. So each set should be taken close enough to failure to stimulate and exhaust all muscle fibers for that particular muscle group for maximal hypertrophy adaptations. A simple way to ensure that all muscle fibers are recruited with each set is to train to failure with every set of every exercise. However, training to failure too frequently also has its downsides. If training is taken to failure too frequently, it will be very fatiguing from both a local and systemic perspective. From a local perspective, training to complete failure will reduce the muscle's ability to produce force for each subsequent set of that particular muscle group in that same session. This means that the quality of training for the rest of the session may be reduced. From a systemic perspective, training to complete failure may centrally fatigue the athlete throughout the week and the entire mesocycle. This may reduce the recovery capacity of the trainee and not allow them to perform as much total volume throughout the week. So here are some practical guidelines to help trainees determine how close to failure they should be training. The majority of training for hypertrophy should take sets fairly close to failure to ensure that all muscle fibers are trained. Practically, around 1 to 4 reps in reserve should be used for most sets, as this is able to recruit all muscle fibers without going to complete failure. We also want to ensure that we don't train to complete failure too frequently. This is because continuous training to failure will increase the potential of training beyond recoverable capacity and increase the likelihood of burning out from a psychological standpoint. The next practical takeaway is that lighter loads should be taken closer to failure while heavier loads don't need to be taken as close to failure. So sets using around 12 reps and above should be taken to an RIR of at least 2. Sets using rep ranges of 6 to 12 will stimulate all muscle fibers earlier and only need to be taken to around 2 to 4 reps in reserve. And the last practical guideline is that smaller isolation exercises can be taken to complete failure more frequently than heavier compound lifts. This is because training smaller muscles with isolation exercises will induce much lower levels of fatigue than compound lifts training large muscle groups. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.